Let me try that again. Stop share. Share screen.
Is this the document that he sent for the second course? It says instructional and it says supreme
Here we
and
go.
almighty supreme and then the supreme
Oh, okay.
mind.
Yeah,
There
but
it
that's
is on my
today's
screen.
date.
The
That's
emergence of
today's
supreme.
date, so it looks right.
Class 2.
Class 2,
Yeah.
yeah.
411, that's it.
Good
Yeah.
Yeah,
going.
leave that there. Yeah,
Bravo,
okay.
bravo.
Scroll down. It's past that.
Okay.
That's
The next page, one
first page.
more page.
Go on.
There you go. There you go. Back
There.
up.
Up a
There
little.
you are. Right here, keep going. Keep going.
Is there a link to that posted on the internet? And so maybe you can put it in the text chat area.
Everybody got that.
Yeah, so it's if you haven't thrown away your old mail, it's on your computer.
No,
That's
That's
what I'm looking for, Ma.
This is the lexicon. And then
Yeah,
you
keep
go,
going. Keep going.
you gotta go past the
Going up.
down.
Yeah, further. There you go.
There it is.
There it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it right there.
That's it. Exactly.
Right, but those are the readings.
Yeah, well, you
Yeah.
read that one quote and then there's the readings.
Last
Right.
He had you read that quote last week. And then we went down and started.
Right.
So you want to read the quote? Bryce?
Oh, I could read it, but I mean, then we'll be stuck. Don't we need to go to the forward section 6, energy and pattern? After that?
That's what I think.
That's so. Yeah, but somebody could read that. We could.
Yeah, somebody should read that red thing that,
Okay. Okay, I'll read it.
okay.
Go up one more, see what's on is that the checkered pattern on the next page? Go up one.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I'll read that one. God the Supreme, the Almighty Supreme, and the Supreme Mind. The Supreme Being is the unification of 3 phases of deity reality. God the Supreme, the spiritual unification of certain finite aspects of the Paradise Trinity, the Almighty Supreme, the power unification of the grand universe creators, and the Supreme Mind, the individual contribution of the third source and center, and his coordinates to the reality of the Supreme Being. So the forward, it would be section 0 right in the front.
So
And then section 7, paragraph 1.
yeah, we're not going to read those. I mean, we didn't read those last time. Then
That's homework.
that's homework. So if you keep scrolling
Okay.
down, get to the reading, past the lexicon, keep going. Down past the lexicon, keep going. I copied some of them out that were interest to me, but they're in the 20.
Instructional?
There it is. There it
That's
is.
the first one.
That's the
Okay.
first one. Last you.
Okay,
That's
so
what
you
said.
guys received this. I didn't get this, but I'll dig for it. Okay. Instructional, God the Supreme. I just read that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
That was
That's the introduction. Last one.
yeah, that's a duplication.
So now go to the next one. There it is.
Here's a graph that he did.
Yeah,
I made a copy of this because I love visuals.
Yeah.
Mm.
I have this elsewhere. Okay. So go down just a little bit. I'll start reading the type down there. Okay, that's good. God the Supreme is a consequence of the acts of infinite deity. Although the evolving Supreme Being is in the process of actualization in time and space, the spirit personality of the emerging Supreme Being is fully existent today as God the Supreme.
Yeah.
Analogous to our mortal view of ourselves as body, mind, and spirit, the composite identity of the Supreme Being may crudely be thought of as the Almighty Supreme Body, the Supreme Mind, and God the Supreme Spirit. The spirit person of God the Supreme takes origin from the Paradise Deities and functions in the present universe age only in the perfection of Havona and only on spiritual levels. God the Supreme will not be fully functional in the universe of universes until that time when the final actualization of the unified Supreme Being comes to fruition. The spirit personality of God the Supreme is directly derived from the Paradise Trinity. For the Trinity is original deity, while the Supreme is derived deity. God the Supreme depends on the Trinity for his personal and spirit nature. Prior to the sometime to be completed power personality synthesis of the Paradise Deities in the experiential universes of time and space, the perfect and symmetrical spirit nature of the Supreme Being is revealed in the spirit person of God the Supreme. So let's discuss. I think you want to go back up to the picture.
Nice picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Paradise Trinity is the origin of the Supreme, but the Supreme is evolving through the Eternal Son, the Spirit, mind, matter, through all levels of time and space.
Yeah.
Where are we in all that?
Over on the right. We're part of matter and mind and spirit. I mean, we are in essence all three of these.
But that's for the Isle of Paradise, the matter from the Isle of Paradise. That's why it's separate. You just read that. It's
Yeah.
the Trinity is on its side. The triangle is on its side. That's interesting. So
Really, I think what he's talking about is on the left with the experiential finite reality. That's where the Supreme Being is being expressed.
Expressed or evolved.
Both.
Both, yeah. My understanding, going back from going over this before, I had to kind of keep it simple, and I just equated God the Supreme with God in time. So he's actualizing, but he's in time and he's evolving. So, but the Paradise Trinity, it's connected to that, but it's a different aspect of it. And I think from what we just read, it's as it said, the spirit, mind, and matter. It's God the Supreme Mind, and Almighty Supreme. Right. It's all three of those.
You know,
Like on the
yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think of it like this. Okay, we're spirit, mind, and matter. We have spirit. We have the pull from the spiritual. We have the pull from the material because we're of material origin. And the thing that ties the two together, the spiritual and the material, is our mind. It's the use of our mind. And the three of those are the same thing that are in the eventual Supreme Being. God the Supreme is derived from the Trinity. Mind is from the infinite spirit. And the Almighty Supreme, that's us and all the other activities that are going on in the seven super universes. If you see there, it says the Supreme Creators. He starts with the Master Spirits, then it through the Ancient Days, then Creator Sons. Creator Sons made us. So the power part of the power personality combination is the Almighty Supreme. That's what's going on in the experiential seven master in the seven super universes. Whereas God the Supreme is still in paradise because it's
Okay.
part of its parent is the Paradise Trinity. And the
Okay.
use of mind, which
Okay, right above it, right.
how's mind expressed at our level? Well, it starts with the infinite spirit, whittled down to the divine minister, down to the adjutants, and all of that is eventually the creation of the supreme being, which is the fulfillment of light and life. When everything in the seven super universes reaches light and life, the supreme being has emerged. That's just my understanding of it.
No,
No, that's how.
so you're saying here that the Supreme fulfills his supremacy after all the seven universes receive light and light. And that's the end of the grand universe. And then the Supreme, in a sense, if I can extrapolate from other classes, there's the ultimate. In other words, then the ultimate greater Supreme for the master universe comes into
Right.
development of some
Right.
sort.
That's it.
Is that our understanding?
Yeah, to me, that you're right. And the Supreme is not, I mean, just because he's emerged, that doesn't mean that, okay, I'm going to go on vacation in Hawaii. I mean, he's still going to be part of the eventual emergence of the ultimate. It's all part of that.
Yeah, but I think when we reach light and life, my understanding is the Supreme almost now goes into phase 2. Like Windows or app, it's phase 1, and then when it's light and life, now it goes to phase 2. Now it's starting to evolve even further into the ultimate.
There you go.
It's taking on another evolution to go towards that, becoming that in the end, right? But we're in a different phase. All the universes are, right?
Yeah, that second stage being that of the absonite level. Remember the 7 levels of reality?
Right.
3 finite, 3 absonite, 1 absolute. We are beginning to start the beginnings of the absonite levels of reality.
Now, our responsibility in this whole diagram has been the bottom left corner experiential finite reality. Every act that we do contributes to the Supreme. And when the culmination of every act of every mortal being over all the time it takes to get the whole universe perfect, those things all add up. We have a responsibility. We need to, if we don't do our part, then someone else will have to do it because it has to be done. So,
Royce, I want to clarify something. You were saying the Supreme develops into the ultimate. It was always my understanding there were always 2 separate, distinct entities, but that's not correct?
They are. I think so. I think they are.
I'm not clear. If the others know, that I'll go with it. But I'm not clear on that. But I believe you.
Yeah. I'll jump in real quick. Hi guys. I'm sorry, late. Just got off the bicycle, but I'm here. So I know we're all missing Stuart. I'll generally stand back here, let you guys, because I hadn't read the materials or what, I've got them here. I'll be available. You guys sound like you're doing real well, but I'll help any assistance you might need in working through this. Now, the Supreme and Ultimate do maintain their separate natures. The Supreme contributes to the development of the Ultimate, but they are different personalities and different, beings in the end, using both of those terms.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Good.
To me, one of the most fantastic things about all of this is the fact that this revelation of the Supreme Being, I said it in another class that I'd heard the term when I was a young Catholic. I didn't know what it meant, but that's one of the many, how many were there? 64 revelations that came from this book that was in that mini messenger we just got, if you got that email. And this is one of them, this concept of an experiential deity. And
I've always
put a lot of responsibility on our backs, Michael, you're right.
Yeah, I've always thought that the Supreme really is one of those revelations the supreme as espoused in Eastern philosophy is mostly, you have to meld in and be one with the supreme. But the Urantia book really shows that the supreme includes our actions. It's the actions both of creative deity and us, creatures. That is kind of different. It's a different approach to deity than the Eastern approach and the Western approach. There are some good lines of thought in both of those Eastern and Western cultures, but the Urantia book clarifies it on a supreme level, and it makes sense. The way this diagram is, this really is a revelation because it describes the framework of the universe. That arrow on the very right, the Almighty Supreme, that's the power personalization of the Supreme. That means all the actions from top down and bottom up, all the experiential actions are gathered in what they call the Almighty Supreme, the power personalization of the Supreme. Now, the Supreme on the left is they call it that God the Supreme is you could hear, it's the echo of the Trinity inside of time and space. They call it a spirit personality. It's truly a spirit personality. And as our actions are filling up the Almighty Supreme, the result is that we create the Supreme Being. And at any given time, the tension between the two is basically the mindal aspect. So the Supreme Mind it's at a particular time of its history, and that mindal portion of the Supreme is basically, the status of the Supreme, if you will, at any given point in time. Now, once the Supreme is actually actualized, all three of those become the Supreme Being. So the personality now is filled completely up by us, the Almighty Supreme, and it actually becomes a complete personality, which every single one of us will be able to use as a tool in our toolbox. So this is the way it's all structured in the universe, and it makes sense from a logical point of view how it works. It might be a little complicated in the way, it's got to be complicated because it's the universe of universes. So, it's a complicated concept, but overall, it makes sense from a logical point of view, in my view.
Yeah. No, that was good, Lee.
If I can ask a question, I see that Stuart had asked, a question here, and his question number 1 for the week that you've done some reading and thinking about seems to me as the point here to a degree, and I'd like to ask, he basically says, okay, here's the outline, what the Supreme, what his thing is here, but what I'd like to think of or ask, he asks this, what do you think can be found similar or dissimilar regarding our mutual 3 phases of reality? I'd like to ask, in terms of clarifying what's going on with the Supreme, is how do you liken that to how we develop, from where we start, how we become, okay, through time, through experience, how we master our tasks, how we become perfect, and then what it is that we are capable of doing, what is it that makes us capable of accomplishing, and then how does that make our personalities visible in the universe, right? The only way of your personality being visible in the universe at all is through what you do, right? Your interaction with reality, because the personality, so is that something like what God the Supreme, so I think that as hard as this may be, kind of get our hands on, okay, what's going on? I think if we can analogize it to our own experience, because I think that they are able to give us a clearer idea of what's going on with us. And maybe that will help us to get a clearer idea of what's going on here. Because I agree, this is, this is difficult. You guys are struggling with some very difficult stuff, and I'm glad Stuart's the one who's going through here with you. But whenever possible, I say, I'm the dumb one. Let's see if we can get it down to some, human analog here. And I think this is one that can work. And
Well,
so, follow on, and Michael, then you're on, is okay, well, wait a minute, where's our soul? Where's that here? Or is that, again, is that even a good question of this? Okay, yeah, so go for it. But that's where, let's put it in if it's helpful. Okay, think of it like ourselves, because I think it's similar. Okay, Michael, go for it.
well, just in my experience, for example, any of us, I made one act that caused the adjuster to join me. One act. That was one act for the Supreme. The adjuster and my higher self have been continually building the soul that becomes the new me, that becomes the center, the source of my being forever. And I think that is one analogy to the Supreme Being, who is a combination of all of those acts and the leading of the would be the Supreme Mind or the Universal Father Trinity. I'm not sure, but that's it. That's Trinity is the other part of the building. That would be my analogy.
I like it where it's, and I think I'm being redundant, but it's the Supreme is spirit, mind, and matter. You see it there on the diagram. Are we not spirit, mind, and matter? Is not the expression of the eventual Supreme Being like our expression and our eventual finality position, or maybe it's even infusion. There's still growth after that. But if we reach finality status, is that not in the same pattern? Maybe
Yeah, I think you're onto it. I think you're correct about that. I think we can almost say, I'm not sure if this is correct, but let's say that the Almighty Supreme could be analogous to our soul. So as our soul grows, we grow. As the Almighty Supreme grows, which is a combination, you can almost consider it as the group soul, right? Group soul that's growing. All the souls are growing in the Almighty Supreme. So that's kind of the group soul concept. You got spirit over on the left, you got mind in the middle, and you've got soul, the group soul that's growing experientially on the right, which is called the Almighty Supreme. Am I on the right track there?
Well, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm looking at it a little different. I'm looking at the matter, especially the creator's sons, okay, and the mother spirit. Those are things that, and the mother spirit is actual all matter, the whole universe that we live in. Those things contributed to making us mortal free will creatures. But our soul is something that works with God. Like you have here, the Paradise Trinity, we have that father aspect. That's part of a component that makes us us. So we have that aspect. We're coming from matter, which would be the equivalent of the Isle of Paradise, and below it, the contributors to our universe and our physical being, the creator's sons. And then you have the person in the middle, which is us as a composite of all our experiences, matter, mind, all of it. We're a combination of all of that. So I'm looking at it that way. There's spirit, and then the mindal and the matter. We're physical creatures now. We're going to become more spiritual. We'll have more mind. And these are the contributing factors that make us what we are. Where I was with Mike, I agree with you. I think that is almost the Supreme Being as it goes into phase 2. That's like it's gathered all the experience and become all it can possibly been. All possible possibilities have been exhausted. So now
Right.
it goes to this next phase. Well, I'm likening that to us when we become finaliters. That, now we've done everything. We've done Havona, we've done everything in this universe, and now we're going on to phase 2. And that is as the supreme being will be doing then, we'll
Same
be
thing.
going to the outer space levels.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that's after we've hopped around the 7 master universes before they become light and life. So I'm looking at it that way, and open to any corrections or amendments.
Just for a moment, I'd like to go back to the very beginning as to the various need of a supreme. The universal father, he's at the top of the chart. Does the universal father in any way possible, in any experiential sense that he has, need the supreme? Or did he, in a sense, invent the supreme only for our benefit in our progression? Does the universal father expand in any sense? And I'm saying a touch of experiential knowledge that he would never experience in his self-existent existence. And
yes, you're right, because he's existential. He's existential, but he doesn't have experiential, which is what he gets through the supreme.
That's my point then. So he's invested in the supreme as well as we are.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel better knowing that. Believing that.
Yeah, that the supreme is the expression of that experience. That's him. He's created all of this. He wants to see how it turns out. He wants to feel the experience. Well, being existential, he's got to have a part of him that's experiential, i.e.
The supreme is not an avatar of the universal father.
Avatar.
Yeah.
You remember the movie Avatar?
I don't know what you mean by avatar.
Yeah, but what do you mean by that?
Well, do you remember the movie Avatar?
Yes.
Where they put the guy in a little tube and then his spirit goes and develops into the individuals in that world. In other words, they kept going in and out of the physical bodies of those worlds.
Okay.
See what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So
yeah, I don't know how to answer that.
Maybe that's too far out there.
Yeah.
The supreme is not an avatar of the universal father in a sense. No, maybe.
Right. Well, the supreme is real. Just as God the Father in the Paradise Trinity exists in that existential level, that's a reality that we're not familiar with yet, but that's a reality in and of itself. But the physical universe that we're starting out in, that's also real in a different sense. And in order for him to know what that's about, he created the supreme being so he can experience time and everything else that goes with it. I remember someone once said God created us so that he can know vicariously what imperfection and striving is all about. That's why we have thought adjusters. But this is in a sense similar, that it's a repository of all the experiences of all the universes, and it too is evolving as a separate entity on its own to now go into this light and life and then evolve into phase 2, whatever that's going to be, and we'll be there with it as
Is
finality.
this the first time the universal father has done all this? Or is there a circle, that circle of eternity? Is this the first time the universal father says, I'm alone. Okay, somehow I created the sun, but the sun's already existential. And then is the Urantia book an example of the first time the universal father has done any of this program?
Well, that's all that we've been given. Yeah. If it's done it before, then they either feel we don't need to know it, or we're starting some new phase that maybe we're really in phase 2 and we don't know what phase 1 was, and this supreme is going to go into phase 3 for all I know.
We could be phase infinite. We don't know how many times the father has done that.
No, I think it's the first.
I don't know.
That's speculation.
Yeah.
Now this is the first time because we are at such a low level of spiritual being that I can't see us going any lower. In other words, there we're not, we don't have a level zero. There's no level zero here. We're at the first universe age here.
Yeah.
And the thing is that you can think of the supreme really is scaffolding. It's scaffolding in the sense that the God the Father is trying to bridge a gap. Okay, we are mostly material in our thinking. Okay, we have a spiritual aspect to us, but we're mostly material. We have to bridge that gap, and we have to try to understand an existential being. So the supreme is scaffolding in that process. Okay, and once the supreme is even actualized, then we begin our real spiritual career in the ultimate absonite sense of the word. And if you do a study in the Urantia book, you get to understand that the supreme is only 0.0001% of the energy and spiritual energy in the universe. In other words, even after the supreme is actualized, we have 99.999% of our universe career to go. So you can think of the supreme as scaffolding, it's scaffolding for us to understand the creator. But it's important scaffolding. At this low level of understanding, we have to go through this process to even attempt to understand what existential even means.
So let me just to clarify, make sure we're on the same page here, Lee. Are we starting out on ground level, or are we in the basement?
Can I interject here something?
Yes.
Let me mention something that might help some of this. I've been reading a study of the Master Universe with appendices by William Sadler Jr.
Yeah.
On page 27, it talks about the universe ages and the new space level. The first universe age is the Havona space level. The second universe age is the super universe space level, and that's where we're at.
Right.
And he even speaks about a zero universe age, which is the age when the universal Father created the Son and the Spirit, whom we know are all eternal, and there was no beginning to them. But he speaks about all these ages. And then you've got the third universe age, the fourth universe age, the fifth universe age, and the sixth universe age. And those are the ones with the outer space growing. So
first outer space level, second, third, fourth.
Yep.
And then we don't know after that. There may be a fifth. Who knows?
Yeah. So I'd highly recommend reading this book because it clarifies so many of these question marks that we get. The more we know, the more question marks we come up with, right? So I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it.
What's the name of it again?
No, I have the book and I've tried to get through it. Well, it would be great to have a class on that book.
What's the name of it?
I did.
A study of
I was in a
universe.
Oh, you were?
With
Hold on.
appendices.
I have the book.
William
Michael is being a good guy here.
Junior.
Okay, let's let Michael speak, and then I would encourage you to maybe use the hands thing so that everybody can participate. And when you've said one round, because the back and forth is different. The conversations are great, but then it just, they're really good. This is all a conversation, but let's try to organize a little bit so that it doesn't just devolve into back and forth between two people, and then just because everybody's involved. Okay, so if possible, use your hand to get up. We won't become slaves to it, but let's try. Okay, Michael.
Well, first of all, we are trying to parse God, and God is completely enough in and of himself. He's not becoming a bigger God because of the Supreme Being. He has decided that the perfect universe has a lot of beings, a lot of things happen, a lot of perfection. We are going to become seventh grade level spirits before the Supreme Being actualizes. So that's a long way away. And so, and like you said, this is like 1,000th of the quote energy of the universe. So there's an incredible thing coming. The world is getting better and better all the time. So I think that Rather, the supreme being is the culmination of one of God's purposes. That rather than an expansion of God, you can't expand God. God does already everything. That's all.
Okay, Michael, that's good.
Uh,
Janice and then Mike.
I was trying to get the name of the book this other lady mentioned.
Study of the Master Universe. Study
Okay.
of the Master Universe. And then the second volume, although it looks like it's now in a single volume, is the appendices of the Study of the Master Universe. And they're both by William Sadler Jr. And the appendices are a more difficult and involved read than the main thing. That's all worthwhile if you're into it. But the Study of the Master Universe lays out his thesis and is quite good. And you can get it. For a long time it was out of print, but you can get it now. It's been reprinted, and it may even be in PDF form.
Thank you.
no.
Mike.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo what Janice was saying, because that is a very, very good reference, in my opinion, a very good reference to understand the only way we can, being finite creatures in some kind of sequential sense, from the very beginning to wherever else. There is, and I'm with Merritt in that the gold book that Janice is holding up, in my opinion, is pretty damn difficult to understand unless you have the appendix, the red edition, because that's the one you go back to in your study. Personally, I was lucky enough with a guy named Jean Pierre Houtier and another lady. We spent a whole year doing it, and it was, yeah. That Bill Sackler was spot on in my opinion, and it clarified a lot of this immensity that has a tendency to just kind of blow some folks' mind, because it certainly was blowing mine, but it's much more clear now. So it's a great reference, and you're right, Vincent. It'd be nice if there'd be a class on those two texts.
Might be something that can be done. I think there's a few people around who probably like to do that, and it's a good piece of philosophy. I mean, it's a good example, as opposed to, of somebody taking this in one way and laying over a really good methodology on top of the Urantia book to see where it goes now. Yeah, it has some great insights in it. So thanks, Mike. Vincent.
No, I just want to clarify. I bought the book from Amazon. It's not a cheap book, and it has the combination of the appendices. It's like 28, maybe $30. But Merritt, head up the class on it. We'd love it.
Well, I know people who are more of an expert on it than I. I've had it for a long time, and I've read it a lot. But there are better people. However, I think that's a great idea to put that out there, because it's very instructive, both as an example of methodology as well as what it is, as the story itself that he tells, as well as an example on how to think about the things in the Urantia book. So I'm going to be dumb here. I need to bring us back to, though, what I'm hearing here is and I know Stuart will probably thrash me for going this way, but that's okay. We'll handle that off screen. But I really think that the Supreme is almost a perfect analog to our own experience. What is it? How do we grow? Okay, we have a mind, a gift from someplace, right? Infinite spirit. We have a spirit, another gift. We have a body, a gift, and our soul grows. But what is the nature of this growth? In order to understand, I think, what the Supreme is doing and what it accomplishes, what is it that, when you think about it, it's not, we can talk about it as the attainment of light and life, and then there he is kind of thing. But if we think about it as analogous, what is it that changes in us over time? What changes in us from the time that we're, say, 5, 4, even before we get a thought adjuster, but then, the elementary school us, we can all remember that far back. and the teenage us and the young adult us and the old, what changes? We know personality doesn't change. Mind is a tool that we have and presumably get better at using. Our bodies just get old, and that's one part of it. So what is it that changes and becomes more, becomes different, and I think that we need to get it to some degree. It's always a philosophical thing, but to some degree, to really get it, if we can put it into our own model or the model of our kids. Look at your kids. How do they change? Sometimes it's a little hard to look at ourselves, but what can we expect out? What is added to them? What makes them more capable? What does more capability consist of, right? And what is it that the maturity, becomes? So to the degree that it's helpful, if it's helpful, maybe everybody will look at me and say, this is not a helpful thing. We'll go look at it differently. But whenever, we see a diagram like this, I see, okay, this is another diagram of human experience. We get all the analogs of these things. And if we want to try to understand what's going on with the Supreme, I think, especially with where it starts and how it becomes, and what it is then what constitutes the difference between the beginnings of the Supreme and the consummation in this age of the Supreme, etc., is to analogize it as much as possible, knowing that we're running off. Okay, Royce, and then Jane, and thanks for putting up with my speak. Mike will know, by the way, I'll just say, I'm going to really try to restrain myself, but Mike will know, and as does Lee, that I will occasionally say something at least 5 times before stopping. Now, this is because my kids never paid attention to me, of course, but in any case, you're free at any time to wave your hand and say, I've heard it enough, stop. Okay, and I won't take offense. So, Royce and then Jane.
I'll take a stab at it. Now, just to go back to base 1, if I understand your question correctly, I'm looking at it that you're asking. There's a macro level and a micro level, and these things are happening on the Supreme level and on our little human. So if we look at Supreme as macro, we'll look at mortal as micro. I think that we grow, and I was mentioning it last night in the study group. The first day you could say that we are registered in school. We go to kindergarten. Our first class, and that we've entered it, is when we make our first moral decision. And that's significant because upon doing that, the thought adjuster comes. That's when school begins. And that's when we start getting graded and we're learning. I think the development, as you say, well, what makes us grow? What is it? I think it's the moral choices we make and what we learn along the way, which turns into wisdom and worship. But the Supreme is the repository when we make those moral decisions and the good that comes out of it, our growth, how that decision benefited others. That's the growth that happens, the way I'm looking at it. That's the growth that happens. If we go, our good spiritual acts, events that happen, that spread out from us, wind up in the Supreme. But if we became a no longer, it would still have that. We would be gone, but that good work, those fruits of the Spirit, those things would live on in the Supreme. It would live on in us as long as we're still on board and becoming ascending free will creatures. So I think the growth is dependent on the moral decisions, the experiences we go through, and the wisdom that's distilled from it, as well as our trying to do the Father's will, become like the Father, become perfect, and to do all that with making the universe and contributing to it as co-creators to make the universe what God's plan was about, that we get on board with trying to help bring that about. And that's where the growth comes from. Now, we're put in all different areas to do that. from here to Havona to finalities, but it's all carrying out. God had a plan, and we want to help make that come true. We want to be part of it and get on board with it. So I think that's where the growth comes from. And it resides in us and in the Supreme, to try to answer your question in that macro, micro way. You're not hearable.
See, isn't that great? Didn't that work well? My mouth moved and you didn't hear anything. Thanks, Royce. That was great. Jane.
Um, well, what I'm hoping for is perhaps if I do a quick summary of what my understanding is of the Supreme, and then perhaps you could correct any errors in my thinking and understanding of the yeah, I think I'll just read like a little bit of a summary of what I need to express, which relates to the question that you have asked. So for me, the Supreme Being is a finite God in the making. In him, the Trinity essence of eternity is brought down, and in him exists the summation of all that is evolving, ascending and descending. Within the Supreme Being, the Mother Spirit is the conduit for all ascending and descending beings. And therein lies the capacity, the womb, so to speak, of all actuals and potentials. The Almighty is the total of the actual and the potential of all finite, the summation of all. And the Supreme is where a creature and a creator unite. And this is the well or the fountain of grace. I don't know if this is correct, but this is my thoughts. It's a fountain, it's a womb of grace from which springs forth our hope, our growth, and our well-being. And it comes out of this passion and yearning that may burn in our heart, that we want to know God, get closer to God, and from depth of our burning desire to love God and to be like God and to want to do God's will in our life, and also in turn become a conduit for someone else, starting with those we love, and the conduit that circle would continue to grow. We've been blessed with the 7 adjutant and the mind spirit, and then it's up to us. We don't really have to work, but our intention is very important. And that there is this well, I feel that there is the Supreme is this well that can feed us, but I'm not sure. This is an intuitiveness kind of thing that drives me to want to get closer. So there could be a lot of incorrect thinking, and that's what I hope to clarify if you can. That's my understanding. Thank you.
I think there's obviously there's some very helpful things in there, and that's the key. Remember, everything we think is wrong. The issue is it helpful? At constructing, I think that's really good. And I think you've hit on a lot of, like I say, helpful thoughts there, thinking of the Supreme as a spring of knowledge. I think that the Supreme, to a degree, well, anyway, no, I think that's really good. I think that while we are participating in the Supreme and the Supreme is growing, I don't know how much directly, well, be interesting, how much the growth is the Supreme over time contributes to the ability of us, to our growth as individuals. You know, the way the growth of a group, or the, you know, all the members in the group contributes to the growth of each person in the group, is reasonably analogous, except that there's another person there. So I think there's some real good things in there. It's yeah. So hopefully that's helpful too. Yeah. Thank you, Jane. And I don't have any, you know, was this wrong or was this right? Because I don't. You know, I think that's just a really good illustration of a way to think about it that works for you. Yeah. Is that okay? Good.
It's so great that when people speak, they give what I would say a truth and whatnot. We could have a class on any one of the comments. And Jane, when you were reading that, I believe you said that the environment of the Supreme is where we unite with, in a sense, Father. And that helps. And if that's so, then that gives more credence to me as to the need of the Supreme for us. And maybe the class can clarify that the environment of the Supreme is where we unite with Father in a sense. But I guess I wanted to go ultimately to the end. In what way are we to be perfect as Father in heaven is perfect? Are we going to be future I ams in some sense, way, way down in eternity? And is this whole process basically a function of Universal Father reproducing himself, creating other Universal Fathers? I know that's an extrapolation, but I guess I'm looking to more eternal purpose and to this whole process we're going through, and it's such an intricate process. And but anyways, those were some of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
We could have classes on some of those too, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Great. Jack.
You know, for me, sometimes things like this are easier to understand in analogies, and I may be totally off, but let me try it out. As we look back into history, about 150 years, we start to see the evolution of electricity. Even though electricity had been around since the planet first began, we were only beginning to understand it. Prior to that, it was a parlor game prior to about 1860, where you could rub two things and create static electricity. In the beginning of the 20th century, it was really the formation of the Industrial Revolution. And I would also point out that I think the Celestials started saying that, hey, these kids are going to be playing with electricity soon. Everything's about to change. And you start to see the Urantia book, the Theosophical side, Baha'i faith, the sects, and all these other faiths coming into play as new information was coming into play. And now we're at a point that we've got AI. Potentially can change, is changing the world, changing the industrial, changing every infrastructure like nothing in history has ever done before. How do we take that another 150 years from now? We can't even begin to imagine where we're going to be based on where we went in the last 30 years, much less the last 150 years. And the evolution of the Supreme is kind of that same thing. It was very rudimentary at some point in time, but it's been growing for billions of years, where we're talking, the thing that we can look at is 150 years of growth have changed the world like the previous million years didn't begin to change it. Some for good, a lot for bad when it comes to environmental consequences, the ocean, the atmosphere, and a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Thank you. I'm gonna but I'm gonna roll back again a little bit in terms of and then Royce, you can answer the question that I'm posing, right? No, there you go. This is what happens in our study group anyway. You put up your hand, you get to answer the question that's just been raised. Is that think in each of our own minds. Okay, back to, I think we all have the experience, having gained a certain amount of maturity as I look around the table, although there are some far younger than I here. Um, when you think about who are you, okay, you can think of, I think we all feel like we're sort of, I'm me in my 20s, right? That's me, that enthusiastic, this, that, I didn't know as much, et cetera, so forth. But, well, there's that core, there's you, that person, okay? What has changed? And I don't mean just getting creaky. What makes you able to accomplish or to decide more comprehensively, to act more effectively, okay, to act with more alignment to what you perceive as the Father's will? What has added to your ability to perceive what you believe the Father's will is? All of these things, I think you, in your own experience, feel like, well, no, I'm not my ignorant 20-year-old self or 15. I had all the confidence then, but boy, have I learned a lot. And it's not just nuggets of knowledge put in a drawer, right? That's kind of a thing. Experience is not just, and this is, I'm sure, true for the Supreme. It's not just, well, we get experience and it drops in his drawer and now he has more experience. I'm quite sure that it works something like experience does in our lives in all of these areas. So anyway, well, maybe that's helpful. So Royce, you can tell me why I'm wrong. Janice, you can say what's missing. And then we're going to let Cher tell us where we really went off course. Okay, anyway. Royce, and then Janice, and then Cher. Thank you very much.
My first reaction to what you're saying, and I vaguely have it at the top of my head. I can't recite the quote exactly, but I get the gist of what I'm trying to say. And that is, there's an expression that says you can't step in the same river twice. And what that means is that as you enter the river of experience, you're new, it's fresh. But with the first step, that step in and of itself has and creates a little ripple of change in you just by experiencing it. We take the next step, that next step is building upon what you gained in the first step. So now you're transformed and a little different, tweaked by the first step, and the next tweak that comes with your next foot going in the water is tweaking what happened with the first step, so on, all the way down the line. So everything that we learn informs us, tweaks us, gives us hindsight. Hopefully that will stretch out to give us foresight as well, wisdom, and everything else. So I'm looking at it that way. So each step is important, and it's almost like by the time we get through doing all of this stuff, and I don't look at it that we're going to become future little IMs going into the outer space levels. I look at us more as like, Pontius Pilate being sent to Judea to become governor for a while to help things move along and to be administrators. I look at it kind of like that way. And I think that's what will happen. But before we become administrators, we're going to be tried and tested in so many different fields, directions, depth, everything you could throw at us, that we will be outstanding utility infielders to be able to deal with any ball you throw our way. So I think that's the end result. And we'll be judicious, we'll be loving, we'll be mercy dominated, we'll have kindness, we'll have understanding, all these traits that God has and is also still developing in time and with us on an each one-on-one basis with our own individual thought adjuster. So he's growing and getting this imperfect experience as we are, but he's already perfect trying to understand what imperfection is about. We are imperfect trying to get to perfection. And that's our journey and our goal. And then to be of the utmost use wherever we happen to be at whatever level, at whatever time. That's the end goal. And to be, as it said, to be father-like. Part of doing God's will is becoming father-like. And it was interesting, at least for me, this came late, as long as I've been reading the book. Jesus came down to exemplify the Father in his last and seventh bestowal. But while he was here, he said, you have to now recognize, if you look at God as a father in heaven, the next natural consequence is to see everyone as your brother and sister, because we're all in that family and he's the head of it. But now he says, you have to not only love with a brotherly affection, but you have to love like a father. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, you have to imagine from God's perspective how he's viewing every creature in every 7 universes. And you have to try to see the best in them, help to bring out the best in them, and help to appreciate and love them as an aspect of God. You have to come from that vantage point. So I was like, oh, that's a fatherly love. That's a whole other category of love, much more so than brotherly love. So we will, as we evolve, get to that point as well, have that thinking cap and that dualistic, if not triple vision of how we go through everything. But that's my stab at your answer in my response.
Thanks, Russ. That's great. Janice, then share.
I liked what how Brown said it, or Rice said it. Yeah. Okay. So we all got Jesus, and he says there is a need. You have to know that you know you have to be born again. Okay, so that's a big thing. You don't tell they're growing up. You know, they got to be born again. But Jesus told us we have to. We have to be born again to know ourselves as spirit. So in your mind, all the thoughts you're having all day long, you can think about yourself as a mortal, or you can have thoughts of yourself as not that. And how do you do that? Well, I practiced Course in Miracles for a long time, and that's a book written where you practice that identity. You practice the identity of spirit. I am spirit. That's one of the lessons, 365 lessons. And they put you in this frame of mind so that you make that declaration. You're crossing over the line and you are now that. One of them, it says, you say, I'm the ruler of the universe. I mean, somebody want to know how far it goes. Yeah. So, yeah, you have to know yourself as spirit, and your mind's always presenting you with two things. It's either hell or heaven, death or death. It's either true or false. If it's about your mortal self, it's false, because this whole world doesn't affect us one bit. I mean, it's a learning place for us, but the prodigal son who used it all up, thought he was dead. The father said, my son was dead. He thought he was immortal. You got to go past that. So once you're past that, Royce, all this wonderful stuff happens. Yeah, you have to be like the Father, because you realize that your thoughts put out there what you see. There's no world but the one you made. Yeah, okay. That's it.
Great. Thanks, Janice. Yeah, thank you very much. Share.
Well, the Trinity is to the Supreme Being as our thought adjusters are to us. And what that means to me is all of my soul growth throughout my whole life has been initiated by my thought adjuster. And the Supreme Being's soul growth has been initiated by the Trinity. And then both he and all of us, our souls grow because of that initiation. And when we take the time to grow spiritually, whatever means that is. We can use evolutionary religions, we can use revelatory religion, we can do whatever we can find on Urantia to grow our souls. And the Supreme Being, in essence, all these things that we do within ourselves, it grows his soul. But I think most of my growth, even though I was a Christian for, since the age of 16, when I found the Urantia papers in 2020, that's when my soul went Shazbot crazy, because I found revelatory truth and it stuck to me like glue, because it's what I had been looking for my whole life. I got a theology degree, I got a ministry degree, and still there was a huge hole inside of me until I found the Urantia papers. So that was really the thing that my thought adjuster used to teach me who he is, who God is, and what the future is going to be like for all of us. So I kind of see this as the Supreme Being. You know, the Trinity is to him like our thought adjusters are to us. And that is, to me, the growth. I mean, I know our bodies grow and we get old. Go ahead. Oh, are you waving to talk? Oh, okay. So anyway, that's it. That's it. That's all I was thinking of.
Great. Thanks, Cher. Carolyn.
I don't have much to say. I'm a little under the weather today, but I wanted to thank Janice for her wonderful explanation of what A Course in Miracles can do. Because I just want to emphasize that every thought that goes through our heads, I mean, I won't say every thought, but we are so geared to identifying with the body, with all of our habit patterns, our thought habit patterns. And it's, for me, I found it extremely helpful to get past some of those. I'm in the process of doing it now still, but it's a very, very important thing before I feel that we can even go on with our comprehension of the Urantia book. It's, and in fact, I slowed down with my intellect for a while, because it's my intellect was contaminated with thoughts that weren't leading me to not only to an understanding, but to a practice of beginning these steps of identifying with spirit. So I want to thank you, Janice, for that. That was excellent.
You know, and of course, what adds to that again is thank you, all of you. I think we all know in our lives that correct attitude, is different from doing something with that. In other words, capability. Attitude and capability are different things. Capability can come from experience, add on from experience. It can come on from skill. It can come on, all these things you can have. Of course, if you're not attempting to do the Father's will, if you're not attempting to go that way, then, well, much is for naught. But that attempt, there's also the achievement of it. I mean, there's an awful lot of stuff going on. Remember the difference between, and again, I'm only bringing this in because the psychic circles are part of this. Okay, they're part of this supreme. Remember, they're completely different from spirituality. They're complementary, but they say, there are some people who are just about as, first circlers as seven circlers who are about, roughly equivalent spiritually, if you will, in terms of spiritual achievement. But the one is far more effective in the world. And effectiveness in the world is a big deal, right? How else does light and life light and life achieved, right? We all know well-intentioned but ineffective people, right? That doesn't take anything away from their intentions or, anything like that, or even their insight. But whether it's a lack of experience or of skill mastery or of any of these things, that those things are added together, and to attain for the universe, for the supreme, for light and life to be achieved, it requires all of those things. It requires, I mean, and of course, for us to become finaliters, it requires not only correct intention, if you will, clear insight, if you will, but also skillful execution, and sufficient facts to master the necessary challenges and experience. You think too of, imagine the young artist as opposed to the older artist. The young artist may have the insight, may have the desire, but doesn't have the skill yet, or doesn't have the skill that is developed over time, probably does not have the insight that develops over time. And none of that has to do with intention, may have been pure right from the start. And we all hope that, the analog to our experience is that our intention is good, but we start to see with more and more, with better and better insight, how our direction might be improved, right? I always want to do God's will, but our ability to perceive the differences in that, right now it's sort of light and dark. I want to go toward the light. Okay, right? That's God's will. I can perceive it. I want to do that. I have a feeling that as we grow, and this would be as the supreme, the ability to differentiate the spectrum becomes more and more and more. It's no longer black and white. It's now, well, the difference between green and red. Then it's the difference between, slightly different, and all of these are moving in the right direction. But right now, it doesn't matter if we can see green or red, just move toward the light, right? But over time, the difference between becomes important, because moving to the higher frequency, and whatever, is important. That then constitutes your ability to do the Father's will, doing less than you can, either because you don't care, you're blinded, or you're not paying attention, you haven't grown, your experience hasn't been sufficient, and that becomes to the point where the differentiations are incredibly fine. The spectrum is infinite in width and in distinction. Well, that's why doing the Father's will does not become falling off a log, forever. God, I know what to do. I go in the right, right and wrong. It's always a challenge. Always. It doesn't mean that it's a challenge for you to want to do the right thing, right? But to know and to be able to is a continually growing thing, just like it is for all of us, for everybody. I mean, one of my favorite sayings is, the universe is nobody is bored in the universe. Everyone is challenged. That includes the Father, that includes the Supreme, that includes the Master Architects, that includes the Divine Counselors, that includes everybody is challenged. Nobody is, same old job today. I know what's right. I have this experience. I'm going to tell this person what to do and that person what, even after the movement, the reason that, if you will, the Supreme is important in a way, is that the next age, right now we're constrained by time and space. God has created this space within the infinite possibilities and accomplishment for us to have the space between the making of a decision and the accomplishment of that decision. We know it's not the same thing. There are usually things that have to be done, okay, between the one and the other, and God, between the determination to grow and become Father-like, God-like, and the accomplishment of that. There's a space there that didn't used to be, right? When we say, God said, let there be light, there was light. Well, if we say something, I want it to be light, there's a long way in there to do that. And that's this brilliant creation of time and space. And there's a certain order in which one has to do it, right? The Supreme is about, in a way, the Almighty is how things are accomplished in time and space. Well, this has to happen first, this has to happen next, then this, you can, that whole step, just like we know with kids, right? Back to the kids thing. They can't do one thing before the other. They can want to, we want them to want to be able to do this, but they can't, they got to learn, they got to walk before they can run, they got to, this, that, and the other thing. There's a million things like that. Well, the next universe age, the age of the Supreme, we're going to have to, they're not going to be constrained that way, the same way. The choices will be made in a much more flexible relationship to time and space. Okay? Ordering won't be enforced the same way it is here. We're going to have to not only learn how to function there, we're going to have to be able to try to learn how to teach those who are not constrained the way we are, have been the way we grew, the importance of those orders and constraints. Okay, why it's important to walk before you can run, even if you can run before you can walk. Bad illustration, but those are the constraints. That's why it's going to be challenging. That's why even when we're all done this, we're not going to be able to say, okay, I'm ready to go. You know, that administrator thing. I think it's true that that's something we'll be able to do, but we're going to have to be translating this experience, the experience of the Supreme, what the extreme has accomplished in time and space, into a universe that is not constrained in the same way. And that's why they say that, you know, at some point that the Supreme will be done and the ability to have that kind of finite experience will be done. Well, that sounds really weird. What do you mean? You can't. Well, the thing is, the constraints of that will be that they'll no longer be there. You'll be able to do things out of order, if you will. And you can no longer live that constrained experience because you don't have the constraints. The only way to learn them is to learn from those who have had them and who have had to learn that way. So this whole, the Supreme doesn't develop and then get to relax and tell, for the rest of things, sit back and I got it, any more than we will. It's a continuous, the utilization of these powers and accomplishments. And again, it gets back to reflecting always what's the nature of growth, not only what allows me to perceive better what I think God's will is, what allows me to commit more loyally to that perception of what God's will is, but what enables me to actually do that better. And of course, then what enables me to help others to do better. Because that's a different thing entirely, we all know. Anybody who's tried to teach, it's way harder than doing. And all of those things are things that are important for growth. That's all things we want our kids to be able to do, right? We want them to not only be well-intentioned and loyal and accomplished and